Chapter 3, Amerinoid, Part 1, Return to Buffalo, December of 1991 through January of 1993. Introduction. The 1990s were widely dubbed the conspiracy decade due to what some perceived as a growing culture of paranoia, whose expressions continued to find their way into the broader public at an alarmingly increasing frequency. No longer on the pathological fringes, conspiracies had become a staple topic within the mainstream. Elected officials and pundits implied and proclaimed the existence of vast, far-reaching right and left-wing conspiracies, while the American populace simultaneously displayed a bipartisan fusion paranoia, wherein the cynical, conspiratorial thinking of the rightist patriot and militia crowd coincided with surprisingly similar suspicious ruminations on the left. Note: fusion paranoia, a term coined by Michael Kelly in 1995, refers to the convergence of political wings in the conspiracy theory milieu. Beyond the conspiratorial musings of the reactionary right, the so-called conspiracy theories that circulated among the intellectual left at this time touched upon a variety of issues, including the U.S. government's involvement in domestic and foreign assassinations and coups, surveillance and infiltration of the New Left, drug and arms running during an alleged war on drugs, policies targeting minorities, the cover-up of facts surrounding the Gulf War, and Gulf War syndrome. Growing numbers of Americans gravitated towards conspiracy theories as a way to make sense of actual or suspected parallel but unseen realities and realms populated by shadowy government and institutional forces. According to commentator Peter Knight, writing in 1999, the language of conspiracy that dominated the decade and its related canon of conspiracy theories, common subjects of popular entertainment and historical revisionism, involved any number of federal agencies' plots and cover-ups, but all of the conspiracy theories that circulated, those about the 1960s, lone nut assassinations, were the cornerstone of skepticism toward government. According to public opinion polls, in 1964, 87% of Americans accepted the Warren Commission's official account of the JFK assassination. In 1993, 77 to 80% believed some type of government conspiracy was involved in the assassination of JFK, and in 1995, 90% rejected the notion that Oswald acted alone. Note: Knight listed a number of subjects often appearing within the canon of conspiracy theory. They included the deaths of JFK, RFK, MLK, Malcolm X, and Marilyn Monroe, various classified government programs including MK-Ultra, Operation Paperclip, Phoenix, Mongoose, Majestic 12, COINTELPRO, the lives of various assassins including Lee Harvey Oswald, James Earl Ray, Sirhan Sirhan, Arthur Herman Bremer, Mark David Chapman, and John Hinckley Jr., as well as theories about soldiers missing in action, or MIA, LSD, CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, Octopus, Gemstone, Roswell, Area 51, Jonestown, Chappaquiddick, Waco, Oklahoma, Watergate, Iraqgate, Iran-Contra, October Surprise, Savings and Loan, BCCI, Whitewater, Lockerbie, TWA Flight 800, Ebola, AIDS, crack cocaine, military-industrial complex, grassy knoll, magic bullet, lone nut. Even the government was skeptical of the government. In 1992, President Clinton requested that Webster Hubbell, possible Justice Department appointee, find the answers to two pressing questions: who killed JFK, and are there UFOs? That same year, in order to help counter conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination, former President Gerald Ford, the only surviving member of the Warren Commission, requested that the CIA and House Select Committee on Assassinations publicly disclose all their files related to the murder which still remained classified. Perhaps best illustrative of the permeation of conspiracy theories within popular culture was Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK, which, as cultural theorist Jack Bradich pointed out, kicked off a conspiracy panic. Fox Network Television's series X-Files, 1993 through 2002, also reflected, shaped, and defined the decade's preoccupation with conspiracy theories. The show featured a pair of FBI agents tasked with investigating fringe and often paranormal-type cases, who find themselves surrounded by all manner of government conspiracies. Unshakable in their belief that the truth is out there, they continue their quest despite numerous dangers posed to their lives by the conspirators, who include old white men in smoke-filled back rooms where, as everybody knows, conspiracies are hatched. JFK and The X-Files raised questions about their relation to or reflection of actual and possible events, plausible or probable theories about them, and the increasingly blurred lines between fact, fiction, and metaphor. Not surprisingly, the sponge-like McVeigh was an ardent X-Files fan, and after learning of the prosecution's request to disqualify X-Files fans from the pool of potential jurors, he requested that his attorneys specifically include them on the jury, and insisted that the defense jury screening questionnaire include the question of whether or not potential jurors were fans of the X-Files. To illustrate his reasons, he had attorney Randy Coyne, who had never seen the show, record an episode and view it with him. McVeigh told Coyne the show was about covert meetings in the night, secret goings-on, and focused on a ghost government. In a memo written to the other members of the defense team shortly after, Coyne said, "It is clear to me that the government will desperately try to keep all X-Files fans off of Tim's jury. Coyne then attempted to explain the show to the rest of the team, telling them it was about two FBI agents who find that the darker forces of evil are actually clandestine government officials and agencies. Coyne added that as they watched the episode, McVeigh insisted on replaying one particular scene where an Agent Scully chooses not to kill the person believed to have murdered her sister, and declares, "The truth is, no court, no punishment is ever enough." The turn of the millennium witnessed a spate of analysis by academic pundits of conspiracy theories. Some went so far as to claim that their proliferation had, by the 1990s, reached dangerous epidemic proportions and had injected toxins into the public discourse, resulting in a full-blown paranoid virus whose symptoms among the body politic included heightened public fear and widespread cynicism. Since then, a growing number have sought to move beyond the paranoid-style thesis, and in doing so have advanced more sympathetic takes on conspiracy theories themselves, the people who propagate them, and the cultures of conspiracy they comprised. In 2009, historian Catherine Olmsted built on the work of 1990s-era conspiracy theorists by examining why exactly such a large number of Americans believed their own government would engage in conspiracies against them, and the relationship this belief had to actual conspiracies. She found that, despite their seeming outlandishness, the wide array of conspiracy theories all had, quote, at least one thing in common. When they charge that the government has plotted, lied, and covered up, they're often right. She concluded that, between conspiracies and official government stories, citizens should be more skeptical of the latter. Quote, because the most dangerous conspiracies and conspiracy theories flow from the center of American government, not from the margins of society. Thus, for Olmsted, this represented, quote, the struggle over the power to control the public's perception of an event, and posed a direct challenge to the government's authority to create an official version of an event and subsequently maintain it as the truth. While Olmsted interrogated the historicity and social function of conspiracy theories, in 2008, academic and cultural theorist Jack Bradich explored the ways they challenged existing constraints placed upon the very possibility of belief itself. He posited that a conspiracy theory provides a way to discuss a number of issues including race relations, globalization, biowarfare, and biomedicine. Even if they didn't get all the facts right, conspiracy theories posed a threat to the limits of acceptable belief and discourse by calling attention to the broader historical and socio-cultural context surrounding them. The very label conspiracy theory functioned not only as a description of a certain kind of narrative, but also as a label deployed to disqualify certain topics from legitimate public discussion. The rash of criticism which followed the release of Stone's JFK revealed that its subject and its claims stood in direct opposition to existing, yet often unperceived, regimes of truth. For these reasons, he conceived of conspiracy theory as a struggle over meaning, and suggested studying the specific narrative components of any given conspiracy theory, as well as where and when it appears, who speaks it, what else it is linked to, and what it opposes. Following is an attempt to answer this call and show how, even prior to the bombing, McVeigh was caught in the midst of and actively engaged in a number of already existing perception and meaning wars, many of which were amplified afterwards. The truth is out there. Immediately after his arrest, countless news reports linked McVeigh to certain conspiracy theories and the often right-leaning groups who propagated them. The tinfoil hat-wearing, pathological political paranoiac offenders typified by McVeigh reportedly saw black helicopters everywhere they looked, fearing UN troops would soon round up U.S. citizens and relocate them in concentration camps as part of the ever-dreaded New World Order. Nearly overnight, the bombing transformed conspiracy theorists into possible terrorists, and eventually the U.S. State Department concluded that these subcultures of conspiracy and misinformation caused terrorism. This new batch of folk devils invigorated the paranoid's counterparts, the debunkers, who in 1996 said conspiracy theories had spun out of control and had leaked into the real world and created havoc. Built from bad information clogging the roads of the emergent digital highway, they acted as thought contagions that spread information diseases. Works like JFK and the X-Files that expose millions to their counter-narratives now became a source of transmission for this disease. McVeigh and his ilk possessed a form of dangerous knowledge said to be infecting the mainstream on both the political left and right, and a conspiratorial ideology that many now claimed led its adherents to commit hate crimes. Conspiracy theories about McVeigh and the bombing co-opted counterterrorism discourses with their implied or stated claims about a government conspiracy that had actually allowed the bombing to occur, orchestrated it, and in either scenario now actively sought to cover up this fact. Ironically, and to McVeigh's frequently expressed dismay, conspiracy theories about the bombing incorporated him and his act into the very type of fantastical musings he enjoyed previously, but in a manner that sometimes deprived him of his intended legacy as a lone wolf bomber. While, at least for a time, the pack of wolves narratives had not yet been labeled as conspiracy theory, the watched wolves and guilty agent narratives that appeared soon after the bombing were quickly dismissed as such. In the latter, McVeigh is depicted not as a lone wolf, or even one within a pack of wolves, but as a guilty agent, a witting undercover operative for shadowy defense agencies in a nationwide sting operation that resulted in the bombing. The rapid spawning of these stories was reported less than a week after the bombing in the Wall Street Journal and the Las Vegas Review-Journal, among other major media outlets, and within months were canonized in book form by author John Rappaport. Rappaport argued that the bombing and the cover-up of the bombing plot were part of a larger effort by a disgraced federal government to make themselves look like heroes, demonize the Patriot movement, and pass anti-terrorism legislation, which would expand the budgets and powers of various government agencies, thereby allowing them to further suppress the movement. While conceding that he didn't have all the facts just yet, Rappaport thought it was likely that McVeigh himself, although he participated willingly, had not been fully aware of all the details of the plot, and was only the visible face of a much larger government-sanctioned operation. Writing in a similar vein, Garvin Phillips offered additional possible motives for the government's intentional failure to prevent the bombing, i.e. they let it happen, or direct participation in the bombing, i.e. they made it happen, including the destruction of embarrassing records stored in the Murrah building, such as those relating to Gulf War Syndrome or Waco. Phillips suggested that McVeigh was tricked by his government handlers into believing he was doing something good for his country by helping to foil a terrorist plot, the guilty agent story McVeigh himself first told. Like the PAC, Watched, and Guilty Agent narratives, experimental stories first appeared publicly within hours of McVeigh's arrest. Countless news reports detailed how, over the previous years, he had told a number of friends that the Army embedded a microchip in his buttock. For instance, on April 23, 1995, several news outlets quoted Michigan farmer Philip Murawski, who told reports of McVeigh's claim that the government planted one of those chips that they have for identifying cattle, sheep, or goats, so the all-seeing eye of the government could keep an eye on him and know where he was. Murawski recalled McVeigh telling him that the chip sometimes caused a real sharp pain in his rear. The same day, the FBI received a phone call from Linda Thompson, an Indianapolis attorney, militia spokesperson, and producer of the popular underground conspiracy documentary, Waco, the Big Lie, one of McVeigh's favorites. According to the FBI report, Thompson advised that the psychiatrist brought in to examine Timothy McVeigh, Louis Jolyon West, is actually a CIA operative who was responsible for implanting microchips in Army personnel in an experiment called MK-Ultra. She said West did just this to McVeigh during an outpatient procedure that took 20 minutes. She then urged the FBI to prevent West from removing the chip so the FBI could determine what the CIA had done to McVeigh. The FBI report noted that Thompson's allegations had been subsequently printed in the following day's newspaper, the Indianapolis Star. The majority of media reports and commentary about McVeigh's preaching of conspiracy theories highlighted the peculiar subculture that those like him and Thompson inhabited, posited the dangers posed by their beliefs, and dismissed the theories and claims as outlandish. Undeterred, conspiracy genre writers continued to examine and expound upon this topic, however speculatively. Some experimental wolf accounts depict Calspan, a defense establishment research facility where McVeigh briefly worked after leaving the Army, as instrumental in the bombing story. In such stories, Calspan becomes a staging ground for darker and more sinister tales wherein McVeigh acts as an unwitting puppet controlled by mysterious and faceless handlers, often Jolly West, sanctioned and funded by government black budgets. In addition, while so-called credible mainstream commentators briefly note McVeigh's assignment at Calspan, they view it as inconsequential to both the bombing and the ideology he harbored. In 1996, the prominent conspiracy genre writer Jim Keith opined, there is a possibility McVeigh was purposely washed out of his Special Forces training, recruited into a secret specialized unit, then sent to Calspan for indoctrination, training, or, as McVeigh believed, to have his tracking control device implanted in his body. The following year, in Alex Constantine's book entitled Timothy McVeigh's Rise from Robotic Soldier to Mad Bomber, one chapter speculates about McVeigh's possible experiences as a security guard at the Buffalo-based defense contractor. Constantine, like Keith, found it both conceivable and technically feasible that McVeigh was implanted with a telemetry chip drawn into an experimental black project at Calspan, and in combination with more traditional behavioral modification techniques, remotely controlled and transformed into a robotic super soldier. In this story, and stories like it, Calspan, with a little help from the notorious West, fanned McVeigh's rage. Note: other works discussing Calspan, in relation to mind control, or Jolly West, include Jim Keith's 1998 book, Mind Control, World Control, an Encyclopedia of Mind Control, and David Hoffman's 1998 book, The Oklahoma City Bombing and the Politics of Terror, both of which repeat and somewhat add to Constantine's version. Referring to McVeigh's leaked confession just prior to his trial, Cold Warrior USMC retired Mustang Major Dick Culver, in his 1997 essay, The Saga of Lee Harvey, wrote, "Quite frankly, I wouldn't believe McVeigh if he confessed that his real name was Timothy McVeigh. Here's a gent held away from prying eyes for almost 2 years and available for the gentle ministrations of a group of brainwashing experts that make the Chinese communists look like kindergarten kids." Culver said McVeigh probably believed he was, in fact, a lone wolf bomber, so much so that Culver was willing to bet money that if given a lie detector test to this effect, McVeigh would pass. He didn't. By now, Culver reasoned, McVeigh could be programmed to say and believe that black is white. Confessions are strange things indeed. Major Culver knows this because, as an intelligence officer in Vietnam, and therefore an insider, he had access to several North Vietnamese prisoners of war, who, quote, within the space of approximately 2 hours, confessed to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. If you ask the right questions and offer the proper alternative incentives, virtually anyone can be made to say anything and believe it. Writing shortly before McVeigh's trial began, Culver outlined various potential outcomes. One was that either through another programmed killer or his own self-destruction, McVeigh, like Oswald, would be silenced before his day in court. He accurately predicted the actual outcome, writing, "The ideal solution from a conspiracy standpoint would be McVeigh's conviction, speedy execution, and voila, case closed." Note: Culver described the several shifting explanations Stephen Jones gave the media about McVeigh's leaked confession as fishy, and asked what price Jones had demanded to sell out McVeigh. In his 2004 update, Culver pointed out that McVeigh effectively silenced himself when he dropped his appeals and requested his execution to move forward. In both his original 1997 and later updated experimental ruminations, Culver described Dr. Jolly West, who he reminded readers also happened to be Jack Ruby's former psychiatrist, was a proponent of mind control biochips, and therefore McVeigh's most likely mind controller. In Culver's theory, McVeigh's handlers recruited him to be the straw man and patsy for the bombing, based on his history of following orders, and because they knew he would not ask too many questions about his mission. In keeping with the experimental Wolf formula, Culver highlights the history of the CIA's MKUltra program to justify his allegations about Dr. West. Although Culver notes that West denied rumors that he had examined McVeigh at Tinker AFB immediately after his arraignment, Culver dismisses the denial as just another part of the cover-up. According to Culver, McVeigh was probably guilty of, at the least, driving the Ryder truck, but behind the scenes and throughout the entire operation, he had been under the influence of brainwashing by puppeteers working at the behest of still other invisible conspirators, whose motives included the demonization and targeting of militias, and the passage of counterterrorism legislation. Over time, experimental stories gained momentum, as their details became even more bizarrely tangled and convoluted. Blogger Sherman H. Skolnick's June 2001 envisioning of the bombing scenario includes a pack of watched wolves, wherein experimental Wolf McVeigh is under surveillance by the CIA and FBI, and brainwashed by unknown individuals. Similar to David Hoffman's writings, Skolnick reconciled countless sightings of McVeigh in different locations at the same time by suggesting that, like Oswald, the real McVeigh was brainwashed, while imposter McVeighs roamed the country making their presence known as part of a staged espionage event that intentionally or not, and for any number of reasons, spun out of control. In Skolnick's estimation, McVeigh's handlers include Iraqi military officers apparently evidenced by George Bush's former business relationship with Saddam Hussein, and his, Cheney's, and Hillary Clinton's connections to a French company that sold chemicals to Iraq. Among McVeigh's conspirators are some of the more than 4,000 Iraqi defectors relocated in the U.S. after the Gulf War, some in Oklahoma City. In a sense, Skolnick redeems McVeigh's earlier killings in the Gulf War by resurrecting and vindicating the dead Iraqis, and rendering them co-conspirators in a plot against the U.S. government. Skolnick concluded his account by describing the elaborate staging and spectacle of McVeigh's execution, and asking whether or not the real McVeigh was ever put to death at all. As it turns out, although unknown to Skolnick, both the FBI and McVeigh's defense attorneys had conducted their own investigations into possible McVeigh doppelgangers, and occasionally McVeigh himself wondered about them. According to Catherine Olmsted, with the passage of the 1966 Freedom of Information Act, average Americans gained the power to access information, and with it, to construct their own alternative narratives about national events. While the Jones team's quest for McVeigh's records, or the anomalous but overlooked information in the portions obtained, were unknown to Debbie Kidd, she was so convinced that McVeigh wasn't himself, had a look-alike, and a biochip in his rear end courtesy of the U.S. Army, that in 2002 she filed an FOIA request for his military records. She sought his separation from the Army, deployment, and medical records, detailing the insertion of a microchip, a biochip, or any other object foreign to the human body, the surgical or other methods used to implant this device, and those that document any visits, phone calls, or correspondence with Dr. Louis Julian Jolly West. A series of refusals, denials, and contradictory responses by the Army followed, along with her further appeals. Although unknown to her, Kidd sought many of the same records that the Jones team did not possess, and similarly failed to obtain. Note: others, like Salt Lake City attorney Jesse Trentadue, did achieve success with FOIA, prying loose critical information about the bombing plot, and the surveillance of it, from the vaults of monolithic agencies engaging in institutional secrecy. The possibility that McVeigh, like Elvis, was still alive gained traction, even though conspiracy theory writers did not know that McVeigh himself entertained the possibility that his execution might be faked. In September 2001, Weekly World News published their second exclusive expose about this, entitled Timothy McVeigh is Alive. Within days of the bombing, the report said, the real McVeigh received silicone injections to change his facial features, had his fingerprints altered, and was then whisked away to a secure location, believed to be the super-secretive U.S. Air Force base north of Las Vegas known as Area 51, where he assumed a new identity. Oddly, just prior to McVeigh's originally scheduled execution date of May 15, 2001, the DOJ announced the existence of documents prosecutors failed to turn over during discovery, and issued a new date of June 11, 2001 for the execution. Perhaps not knowing about the delay, the tabloid Weekly World News published an image of an ostensibly dead McVeigh on his morgue slab while he was still alive. Experimental wolf speculations about McVeigh in the conspiracy genre apparently inspired Tracy Letts' play Bug, 1996, and its 2006 movie adaptation. Over time, Bug's protagonist Peter explains to his friend Agnes that after World War II, the CIA brought Nazi scientists into the States to work with the American military at Calspan, where they eventually developed the Intelligence-Manned Interface Biochip, a subcutaneous transponder, a computer chip imprinted with living brain cells. This chip, when implanted in human bodies, tracks and controls individuals through electronically emitted signals, but the design was flawed, unable to get to everybody. They need a chip that will self-perpetuate, that will spread like a virus, like a living, breathing parasite. The mad scientists responsible for this project needed lab rats, and they found us, me in the Gulf and another soldier working at Calspan at the time, Tim McVeigh. An anguished Peter goes on to tell Agnes how military doctors shipped them off to Groom Lake, or Area 51, where scientists inserted tracking chips under their skin and used them to conduct mind control experiments. They turned us into fucking zombies, remote-controlled assassins. Although Peter thwarted their efforts by finding his chip and cutting it out, they found him and sent him back to the lab for a new experiment involving the more advanced IMI biochip to track him. Until this writing, there has been no examination, comparison, and contextual analysis of the thematic elements found in guilty agent and experimental wolf narratives about McVeigh, and no substantial factual analysis of those that include claims about Calspan or Dr. West, or his fictional counterparts. While experimental wolf narratives tend to rely solely on speculation, and the majority seem to make outlandish leaps of logic, a close examination of counter-narratives about the Oklahoma bombing and Timothy McVeigh reveals sound reasons, or at least identifiable ones, for their existence, even if they are not true. Such stories, no matter how seemingly fantastical, provide a window through which to explore ongoing collective tensions, fears, and aspirations, and the limits of their articulation. On a practical level, however, purportedly true accounts, as well as fictional works, echo the very claims made by McVeigh himself, publicly and privately, prior to and after his arrest.